Hello, welcome to the complex. My name is Emmett Scanlon. I'm director of the Irish Architecture Foundation, and on behalf of myself and my team and Arup, who are our partners in crime in this great series, Nuna Next, we'd like to thank you all very much for coming here this evening. It's fantastic to see a full room here at the complex. I'm going to say a few words about the series, but I'd also just like to say special thanks to all of the Simons in the building who helped us get the show on the road tonight, and Vanessa at the complex. This evening is the first of 4 talks in the Nuna Next series, and it's the flagship lecture series of the Irish Architecture Foundation. We have a lecture each month between now and the end of the year. And Nuna Next aims to bring you new ideas in architecture and design relevant to now and society today and to our future. Our next talk is already booking. If you're interested in coming, you may have seen in the foyer a promotional poster for this. It's a two-way conversation between Rahel Lionheart-Cape, the Poet Laureate of Architecture from London, and Finn Williams, the city architect of Malmö in Sweden. It's happening at the Lighthouse Cinema on October 14th, and the reason for this is that we have a world exclusive, outside of Venice, of a film commissioned for the Venice Biennale by Leslie Loco that Lionheart made. The event is called Cities Have Feelings, and it's also our Anchor Talks event for Open House Dublin, Ireland's largest event and largest architecture festival, which has been running now for 17 years and is brought to you by the Irish Architecture Foundation. We'd love to see you at the Lighthouse, and if you're interested in coming to that, the second series, Nuna Next, it's available to book on openhousedublin.com right now. But back to tonight, I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to Dublin, Alexandra Hagen, CEO of White Arkitekter. Alexandra is headlining this season of Nuna Next because when I first met her and her team and witnessed their ethics, their ethos, and their commitment to both people and planet through their architecture and the work that they do, I could think of no other architect better placed to do so. If this series of Nuna Next is about gathering in a room to be embraced by ideas and imagination in architecture and design, Alexandra will surely offer us some real insight as to what a practice of scale and depth can do when it comes to the challenges of material and social resources and climate change. Indeed, all of this year's talks will deal with aspects of scale or endeavour of attack, be it in offices with 600 owners, such as White, or individuals working alone. Who we are, our identity, and our role in the society we all share will also be the subject of our discussions. The talks will also deal with resources, human, material, and financial, at a time of scarcity, but I also suggest at a moment of intellectual and emotional abundance, where what we can give to each other freely is our experience, knowledge, and some hope for another, better future. Joining Alexandra for this evening are 2 equally resourceful and brilliant architects, Emma Gagan, who is Head of Architecture at TU Dublin, and Alice Casey, who co-directs Taka Architects in Dublin. Thank you both very much for being here. It means a lot. Before I hand over to Emma, who is going to say a few words to set the scene for Alexandra, I'd like to thank all of you, the audience, for coming. The audience, people, all of you are the fuel that keeps the foundation going, and nothing thrills us more than a room full of people engaged with architecture. On behalf of the IAF and Arup, we hope you enjoy the evening and come back for more. And I now hand over to Emma, who will introduce Alexandra. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmett. Always a hard act to follow. I'm delighted to be here. I was really excited to be asked to do this, but when I met Alexandra and chatted with her with Alice last week with Emmett, I'm even more excited to hear about what Alexandra has to say. I think it's an incredibly pertinent and important conversation around resources, but particularly the nature of how they do their work. So I'm going to be quick because I just want to get Alexandra up on the stage, and then Alice and I will join her for a conversation to try and expand on some of the points she's going to make. And we'd like to hear from the audience as well. So we'll be opening up to the floor for a little bit of a discussion after her slides. So Alexandra Hagen studied at Chalmers University of Technology and then joined White Arkitekter in 2000. Since then, she's had several roles in the practice, including director of the White Arkitekter International and managing director of the Malmö office. But in 2018, she became CEO of the employee-owned practice, It's quite significant. I mean, this is a practice that is distinctive and unlike anything that we have here in Ireland. It's a practice that has about 700 professionals who collectively own the company and are involved in a democratic way of making decisions all the time about how the practice chooses to do its work and continues to kind of hold itself to its own values. The practice is currently working in Sweden, Norway, the UK, Germany, Canada, and East Africa. And it has a vision that all their projects will be carbon neutral from 2030. Just get my notes here, sorry, the lights. Alexandra and the practice that she leads are driven by the conviction that architecture affects people's quality of life, as well as that architects have the power and responsibility to drive development towards a more safe, sustainable future. The core values of the practice are responsibility, curiosity, involvement, and respect. And this is demonstrated through the work that Alexandra is going to present to us tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to Alexandra Hagen. Welcome.
Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. Now I have nothing to tell you. So it's wonderful to be here in Dublin. I've never been here before, and I will, after this very brief visit today, I know I have to come back. This is a great city. I'm going to tell you a little bit about resources in sustainable architecture. In discussing with Emmett, we were talking about how to focus on resources in different ways. So I will talk a little bit about the large architect practice as a resource to achieve change. And I have decided to talk about 2.5 projects. Emmett says we'd rather hear more about less than a little about a lot. And we have somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 ongoing projects at any given time. So it's a little bit hard to choose sometimes. But this is how it all started, the practice. This is Sidney White. And he founded the company in 1951. And his parents were Scottish. So that's why the practice is called White. It's the name of his parents. And early on, he was driven by a democratic way of looking at things, focusing on projects that would add quality of life to many people rather than luxury villas and things like that. And very early on, he also decided to make the practice an employee-owned practice. And these are just a few figures of today. I was asked, how do you measure things in a practice like this? But when we last counted, we were about 705 employees. And with the current Swedish krona rate, which is terrible at the moment, actually, our turnover is somewhere around 65 million euro a year. And we spend about 5 million euro on research and development every year. And you have a few figures on how we measure sustainability in our projects. And we work in 13 countries. You mentioned a few. And our mission is that we enable sustainable life through the art of architecture, and that might seem quite vague. So we've set a very clear and distinct goal that all of our architecture shall be generative and climate neutral through design excellence at the latest by 2030. So, and I think that sustainability has been at the core at White for many decades. We were the first architect practice in Sweden in the early 90s to have an in-house department for sustainability. So we've had it on our radar for quite some time. And we also believe that to be creative, we need to get off the path of least resistance. And this cartoon, the bull Ferdinand, he hates to get off the path of least resistance. He likes to sit in the same place and and with his smell his flowers. We also believe that creativity comes from exposing ourselves to new ideas and new impressions and people that differ from ourselves, and that is a great advantage in a large practice like ours, that we continuously meet new people that don't agree with us. We were talking a little bit here before, how is this practice managed? We have 705 employees and 600 are owners, and they want to impact how the practice is run. So we have an ongoing discussions, and our views on things always differ, and this is really important in creativity, the friction of different perspectives, and that is how you process things into new output. So we need, I always talk about that, we need to be the symphony orchestra of specialists and the creative generalist at the same time. If you look at the symphony orchestra, for example, they are very, very skilled professionals, but they never write new music. They perform new music, and you can do that as a specialist. And the man on the left-hand side, I don't think he's going to sound as good, but he will be more inventive. And as an architect, you need to do the same. You need to shift between exploration mode and performance mode. And that's also something where you can use the large practice as a resource. So we are talking about this as refining the core and pushing boundaries. So some of our projects, they shift the perspective and push boundaries for the entire industry. And these projects are made possible by our curiosity, our capacity to invest in new knowledge, and through the ability to turn untried ideas into real projects. So these projects set new standards. And then on the other hand, it's so important to always work to refine the core, because when you have all of these new inventions and they are not financially viable, they are not efficient, there's a really big job to be done to sort of transform these new inventions into something that you can use every day. That's how you change the world long term. But the core process is often prioritized over pushing boundaries, because that's how we earn money. We do things efficiently, we avoid mistakes, and we use a process that everybody recognizes. And then something appears. I don't know how many of you know what skunk works are. Do you? No one knows what it is. Well, skunk work is the kind of development that people do that is not have not been ordered by the management team. It's just things that people do because they love to explore things. So that's what happens when you only focus on the core process. And you have a lot of people that want to explore, but all of that focus, it doesn't come to its best right. But we have a lot of great inventions that actually stems from skunk work. The GPS, for example, that you all have in your mobile phones today is started as a skunk work project, but that's a different lecture. So as a large practice, it's possible for us to allow space for this skunk work and make and create value from it. But it takes a lot of money to invest in new ideas. This is the team, the research project that we are part of, where we are exploring digital twin cities. And you can see a lot of these companies that are, or institutions that are involved in this research project. They are mostly contractors, real estate companies, universities, and very few architects actually have the money to participate and voice the human perspective in these kinds of research projects. So I think it's, in that way, being a large practice, it's really important. So we put aside quite a lot of, as a large practice, it's also possible to put aside quite a lot of money to do in-house research. And I made this diagram to the chairman of the board for him to explain how, when you invest in something, where does it end up and what is the result? And when you invest in research, you can't really plan for the outcome. Things just happen. And various things come out of this. For example, design, like the door handle you can see there on the left, was part of a research project so that to reduce infections, the spread of infection in hospitals, and it ended up being a door handle. And we normally don't design door handles, but now we sell a lot of those because we invested in research. And on the other side there, you can see Dr. Dennis Mukwege. He's the Peace Prize winner a couple of years ago. And we started a research project looking at EU-funded hospitals in Africa. And it turned out that they were not very well suited for the environment where they were actually built. So we thought we'll have to look into this and see if it can be done better. And we found a hospital that we could try our ideas on and work together with how can we support nations in Africa in providing better health care. And when our research project was won, he actually won the Nobel Prize. So now suddenly the project's got funding, and we have a project in Congo. So things like that happen when you invest in research. And also these two thoughts of, on one hand, avoiding mistakes in delivery process when you're working on large-scale projects, and then on the other hand, allow space to love mistakes, because that is so important in explore process. And I always use this image. This is the Game of Thrones. They were rejected for 10 years before they succeeded with their script. I don't know if you knew that, but you have to keep trying and love your mistakes. And this is one of our most famous authors in Sweden. And he worked for 18 years before he had his first book published. So mistakes is part of a learning process. So the large practice allows space to pursue both perspectives, refining the core and pushing boundaries. It also allows space to develop creative minds, funds for exploration, capacity to influence the industry, and voice the humanistic approach. I think that architects have a really important role in voicing the humanistic approach. Because that's often forgotten by people who are into accounting or construction or money or other things. So that's a very important role that we have. And we also have the capacity to deliver. So now I'm going to move into talking about really two examples of projects. I'm just going to briefly mention. Perhaps you've seen this project, the Sara Cultural Center. It's one of our more famous projects. And the reason I'm showing this is not to tell you about the project, but to tell you about the two young men. They were below 40 when they did this competition. And they won the competition, and they were supported by the practice to deliver it. And I'm really proud of that we are a practice that can support young people to grow and do exceptional things. That's also one of the great values of a large practice. Another one, wood building that you might recognize, that was named Business Building of the Year by the Scene. And this is something that we're working on now, a new wood district in Stockholm, or actually it's a transformation of an existing part of the city that will be the largest construction site in wood in Europe so far. And we're also working in other countries. This is the Velindre Cancer Center, where we're actually working with building parts of this hospital in clay and lime and wood. and we're in Nairobi as well. But I'm going to talk about this project, which is actually our own office in Uppsala. And the developer of this project is Vasakronan, a client that we work with quite a lot, and they share our ambitions to reduce the carbon footprint, and are very ambitious about that. And this is Sweden's first multi-tenant office constructed fully with a wooden structure, and it's LEED Platinum certified, and it started in 2019, and we moved in late 2021 during the pandemic. And Uppsala is a city that is located just an hour away from Stockholm, just an hour north of Stockholm, and the site for this project is very near to the central station. I can't believe that site has been sitting there for ages and no one has done anything with it. But also this project started as a research project. It started with a paper on wood construction. How could wood construction compete with concrete? And we did this study together with this client, Vasakronan, and they decided they were going to take on the challenge to build a wood construction, an office building constructed in wood on this site. Previously, they had another architect working on the project, and it was then in concrete. And we tried lots of different options of load-bearing structures in wood, and most of them, the early ones, were mostly sort of resembling the way we do things in concrete, and it took some time for us to choose the way we would construct it and really use the qualities of wood in the right way. So you can see here that all the load-bearing structure above ground is wood, and the structure is stabilized by elevator shafts, and they are also made out of wood, so no concrete above ground. And it's built with a column grid, and of course beams are higher and spans are shorter than steel and concrete construction, and this might be a reason why you would not choose wood. But we tried many different layouts before we went on with this design to see that these shorter spans were not a restriction for how the building then could be used in the future. This is an image from our office. So it's now 6 office floors, flexible structure, up to 4 tenants per floor, and this sustainable approach, they were really worried that this project would be so expensive and nobody would want to live in it. And what happened was that the building was fully rented 2 years before it was completed, because it was such a sustainable building, and all of the tenants moving in here, they wanted that associated with their own brands. So when this building was completed, the client said, we should have built another building just as big on the site next to this one, and we would have had that fully rented as well. So the sustainable approach also brings really good business. And we have a set palette for materials throughout the whole building. The tenants that move into this building, they can't really choose, because we have chosen a palette that will be good from a carbon footprint standpoint. So this is how it looks inside our Uppsala office. It's one of our 12 offices, and our newest one. And actually, we have the head architect of this project is sitting on the sofa there to the left. Yeah. Yeah. A few more images. And here's the ground floor, and also one thing to consider is how do you also make people more healthy using design? So what we did here was actually hiding the elevators behind the stairs, and then you have a fabulous staircase that is really, really beautiful. And what happens then is that people no longer use the elevators unless they have really heavy things to carry, because they love walking in these steps. So it looks like this when you come in, and there's always someone sitting here. And sometimes they have lectures or gatherings, and people just love using the steps. And the client also says this, that we can't believe how just the design of this floor, the first floor space, has changed the behavior of people in the building. And so onto the facade. It's actually not a wood facade. It's covered in slate, Norwegian slate, so that it would we would not have to transport it very far. And also we managed to get an EU-funded research project involved in this building. So we had 100,000 euro from them to install photovoltaics. And then the client couldn't say no. You can't say no to that much money. So we could work on the design of integrating the photovoltaics into the facade. And you can see here on the northeast and northwest we have larger window openings, and on the southeast and southwest we have these photovoltaics integrated into the facade. And here are some vertical details. I'm not going to go into that because then I'm not going to be done on time. And yeah, you can see it. You can see it here. And also you can see the windows here that are steel on the outside and wood on the inside. And we actually worked together with Schuko, and they made a new product after we completed this that they are now manufacturing. And also you can see there to the right how the photovoltaics are set into the facade. And they also, this is also made into a new product by Schuko now. So this is what they look like when they are installed on the facade. And actually, when you walk there and you look at the building, you don't really think of, you don't really think that it's photovoltaics. They almost look like windows from afar. And of course, it's so important to understand all the parameters on fire. And they affect what is possible and not. And you can see the gray here. That's how much wood will disappear when the building has burned for 1 hour. And in many ways, wood is quite strong when it comes to fire. If you compare to steel, that will melt. If you look at the Twin Towers, for example, the steel would melt, and then the building would collapse. So wood doesn't behave in the same way. And also we have worked a lot to avoid fireproofing paint that we believe is very ugly, but also expensive. And we've managed to do so by working a lot with the details. Another challenge is, of course, the acoustics, the transmission through the woods. And there are several ways to solve this, but we have chosen a light floor that is like above the wood slabs as a solution. And it's really nice and quiet when you walk in there. And also it takes, because the beams are so high, it takes quite a lot of planning for all of the ventilation shafts. But when you put some energy and work into that, it actually becomes better in the end compared to when you just let someone afterwards come in and do it any way they like. So coordination and design is more important in a wood building. And here you can see it being on site. And of course, wood is an organic material, so moisture is it's not very good, and you cannot build in the moisture, so it's really important to have the roof on top of the building really quickly, and it needs to dry out before you can continue building. So here it is, so we can see that this building is performing significantly better if you compare to a concrete building. Energy consumption, 20 kilowatts per hour per square meter a year. And that's 25% less than Swedish requirements. And we have 4,300 cubic meter wood in this structure. And also because we used wood in the framing of the windows, we avoided quite a lot of aluminum profiles, which are not good for carbon footprint. Yeah. So, and we also have photovoltaics on the roof, and yeah. But then, I mean, we worked with Emmet at the Biennale. Wood is not the only solution to carbon footprint. There's a big problem with wood, and it's the increased use of wood causes natural forests to disappear, and it is a challenge to the biodiversity, and this is really what we wanted to talk about in the Biennale. We took the Sara Cultural Center, and that consists of 140,000 trees that had to be cut down in order to build that building. And so what effect does that have on biodiversity? So wood is not the only way forward. We need to work with remake, rethink, and reuse. And we've been working with reuse for quite some time. How am I doing for time now? Am I okay? Yeah. Especially in interior design, this is a couple of years old. It is a cultural center in Gothenburg, where we persuaded the client only to use reused furniture that they already owned, and they were very reluctant to do so. But when we told them that the cost would go down from 12 million Swedish crowns to 4 million Swedish crowns to buy the furniture, they were really happy. So it's about finding the arguments where it's irresistible to become sustainable. You can't turn that down. You want to pay 8 million more and be not sustainable? Is that a good plan? No, it's not a good plan. But then, of course, it looks a bit eclectic, and nowadays, this is from a psychiatric clinic in Sweden, where we actually took all of the furniture and sort of repurposed it and painted it and used it in a new building that they had added to the hospital, and the staff couldn't recognize that it was their old furniture that they got back. They couldn't believe it. I have a lot of pictures from this project, but I promised I'm not gonna. And this is the largest project that we have. I mean, with reuse in furniture, it's difficult to go up in scale. So this is 30,000 square meters of. It's a courthouse in Malmö that we fully furnished with repurposed furniture, and just sourcing that furniture is a real challenge. But it's completed now, and it looks really good. And then, of course, sustainability is a lot about using what we already have when it comes to buildings, but that seems to be more difficult compared to furniture. This is an old power plant that we have transformed into a preschool. And this is also one of these projects that was done on a very, very limited budget, and the client said, no, I can't do it. Sustainability is expensive. We can't pay for it. But they could, and here it is. And the kids love it. Yeah. And this is another one that we're working on in Germany. And when we're working with reuse and repurposing materials, it's really interesting. You have to be so good at legislation. There are so many things in legislations that just restrict the use of old materials, but that's a different lecture. Our way of working with reuse really started with us being sustainability specialists also, and that we've had commissions where we actually coordinate reuse of materials from donor buildings. So how do you categorize this material? How do you store it? What can you reuse? What can't be reused? And we've learned a lot from that role. It's not necessarily something that an architect would normally do, but it's very useful knowledge. And it's also brought us back to this refining the core and pushing boundaries. I mean, how are we gonna document all of these donor buildings? So we started an innovation and research projects where we would structure this to sort of scan the building and then move it into a 3D model and then have an on-site inventory, and then we'll have it in a 3D model that we could actually work with all of the existing materials. So then again, being practical, trying to make things efficient, and then on the other hand, using invention and research to get there. Yeah, I'm not gonna, but this is how we're working with it. Yeah. Oh, and then we sort of could scan everything and have it in the same model, but then when you reuse things from a donor, how do you know what door has been reused in another space and what has not? So we had to continue develop new tools, digital tools, to link material libraries and matching of objects, so that you will know when you're designing what door has been put into a new project and not. Yeah. And it all started with a competition in Germany where we were handed like a library of materials in Excel that was just unreadable. It was impossible to take in. So we had to make a tool so that we could see all of the different components that we could use. And then here you can see how you... when you're working in the model, you put in an object, and then you can see that these specific materials, they have now disappeared from the library of materials that you can use. It makes things easier. So again, it's this learning loop from one project to another, and now I'm coming on to this project, which is actually on the adjacent site to Magazine X that I told you about before, where it's our first really large-scale project where we are working with the reuse. So this is an old official building used by authorities. It's built in 1974. It's just a horrible space that we're going to transform into a modern building. It used to look like that. They're building it on site at the moment, and then we're adding 3 more stories with wood construction on top of this building. And the client wanted to tear this down, and we persuaded them not to tear it down. You have to try this. So. And also you can see here the plan to the left was the original plan, and it was made for just one tenant, so it's really hard with the plan to use it for several tenants. So we had to add this big atrium in the middle in order to make it possible to use for multi-tenant use. And it was not very well connected to the city. It was just like a closed wall that you would walk past, and it felt quite unsafe. So this space also added a valuable connection to the city, making it more attractive, both for the people using the building, but also for the people passing by. And there was not sufficient daylight. We had to tear down the walls, again, because of rules and regulations, because we couldn't add insulation on the outside of the building, because then it would, it would be outside of some kind of line in the street. So we had to actually tear down the facade to integrate the extra insulation into the facade. And we made the windows bigger, so the daylight would also be better. Yeah. And of course, we would work continuously with the carbon calculations in BIM. And the current calculation says that the emissions will be 107 kilograms CO2 emissions per square meter. And that's half of Magazine X that was built in wood. And this is because we keep the entire concrete structure. Yeah, you can see here, 80% of the structure and foundation is reused. And I didn't have time to translate all of this, I'm sorry. But we are reusing light concrete, we are reusing limestone, we are reusing like kitchen interiors and furniture is sold, and also doors and glass partitions. And all of the walls in the atrium, they are built by reused material. And we are also keeping all of the old stairs as fire escapes. We are also reusing electric components and suspended ceilings. And the limestone has been really great to reuse because it has such great acoustic qualities. And also a lot of plaster boards we have. And this takes a different kind of contractor, because you need a contractor who will do demolition in a different way to actually take things out of the building so that you can reuse it. Yeah. And here are the doors and the glass partition. It's really a lot of work to work with reusing doors and glass partitions, but it doesn't have that great of an impact on the CO2. So you can also choose your battles. If you're starting with this, you should start with the elements that actually make the greatest difference. So what guided our choices in what parts we would reuse, it was actually what kind of materials were available in the current project, so we wouldn't have to move it from another site. And then feasibility, is it possible to do this? How easy is it to do this? And then the CO2 reduction potential, and then the construction cost, in that order. And then people say this must have been really expensive. It's actually a little bit cheaper than it would be to build a new building, but also it takes 18 months less to build this building. So 18 months earlier, this client will have a tenant, this house full of tenants, which is a big difference in income. Yeah. The last one, which is just a half a project, which is also in connection with this 140,000 trees. As being part of the building industry, 40% of the emissions come from the building industry, and we need to be focused on nature-based solutions that actually restore the nature that we destroy when we build. And we work with this in projects like the Velindre Cancer Centre in Wales, in the UK, where we are looking at to design parks that are not necessarily really finished parks, but more parks that will be restoring the nature that was once there and add biodiversity to the neighborhood. So the half project, I'd like to tell you about this project. It is a park in the central parts of Bergen. And they had a nearby infrastructure project in Norway. There are a lot of big mountains. So they always, to build a road, you always have to go through one of these mountains. And then you get a lot of stone. So what are you going to do with all of that stone? So we, when we won this competition, we suggested that we'd use all of this stone came from a large infrastructure project nearby to build a new park. Instead of having to ship that stone to somewhere where they would be kept, we built something that the public could use. And it has a lot of great function, but the most important thing is that we're working to restore the meeting between the sea and land. And what we do a lot in our cities is that we sort of just make the land and the water, they just meet with a concrete wall or a stone wall or something. And this is really bad for nature, because that part just between land and water is where a lot of animals and a lot of plants actually thrive, and it's really important to the ecosystem. So this entire park is built to restore this, and we've actually also planted new plants underwater to improve the water quality of the bay in Bergen. So this park will also handle rainwater, it will improve the biodiversity, it will improve the water quality, but it will also be a beautiful space for people to use. There are 60 different trees in this tiny park, and they are all local to Bergen. So I'd like to cite someone of Irish descent, Robert Kennedy. There are those who look at the things the way they are and ask why. And I dream of things that never were and ask why not. And I think that's our role as architects to do that. That's our profession. It's a great profession. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alexandra. That was incredibly inspiring, and it's really lovely to see the thinking behind that level of detail and a practical approach to sustainability, which somehow can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming. Sorry, apology if I'm too close to this. And I had kind of a set of prepared questions, but of course, you know, as you start talking, other things start to occur, and you know, anyway, I'm going to ask you another question because I'm struck by the balance of your approach in some ways, and the fact that you seem to be constantly trying that balance, maybe between the more kind of pragmatic and the poetic, and how that somehow your projects seem to always want to try to achieve both. And that pragmatic approach is maybe, I forget what you called it, the symphony, and then the poetic is the creative exploration. And I'm wondering about the role of beauty within that, you know, that somehow sells or makes more acceptable the more kind of pragmatic aspects, that somehow those two have to go hand in hand, and maybe what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thought is that sustainability has to be beautiful. because what is not beautiful is not sustainable. It's only beautiful buildings that sort of step into people's hearts and they survive over time. When you look at architecture that was built 150 years ago, only the buildings that people love remain. Everything else disappears. And you can look at it in all aspects of design. For example, I have a teenage daughter and she loves fashion. She's online trying to find, she buys everything reused almost. And what does she buy? She doesn't buy clothes from H&M or Zara. She buys great design because that's the only thing that survives. So sustainability has to be beautiful.
And I was wondering as well, because the idea of reuse, and actually in my practice we have a project where actually the client has asked us to reuse all their furniture. But it turns out all their furniture is really quite bog standard and not very beautiful, very standard office furniture that is very difficult to reuse, and it's all quite battered. It's very difficult to repurpose in any way. It's not something that you can even paint. It's that type of material. And that whether there's some attitude to when you have to buy new things, that there's a certain quality to those new things, that kind of reuse is built within, and that can that form part of a costing in a project? Will a client ever say, well, I'll pay more because at some nebulous time in the future, somebody, me or someone else, will reuse this?
That's a long...
I know, sorry.
So where do I start with it? I was saying it's very convenient to think that you can pick something new off the shelf every time you design something. I think that we, as designers and architects, we are better than that, and we are problem solvers. Design is really a tool to solve problems, and it's been a very short time in history that we've actually torn things down and thrown them out. During the past 100 years, the manufacturers have become so efficient that it's financially more viable to throw things away than to reuse them. If you look 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years ago, people wouldn't throw things away like that. Last summer I was in Rome with my family, and you walk there and you have the old thermal baths, and then 1,000 years later somebody comes in and put a cathedral in there, and then it becomes something else and just evolves. And I think architecture should be much more about evolving the existing structure, both socially and also the buildings of the city. I mean, that's how it's meant to be. But it's a greater design challenge to look at what you have and then do something from that. So,
do you mind if I jump in there? Because I also had prepared questions, but also noted that I was interested in, you repeatedly mentioned like pragmatic reuse, refining, streamlined, efficiency, trying to kind of get to a point, thinking about the work involved in getting to a certain point in delivery. And you mentioned a number of times, it takes time, it's a lot of work. And that's in terms of trying to achieve these outcomes around reuse or sustainability measures, but there's also the work involved in creating good design, making that beautiful space. And some of the kind of techniques and kind of methods that you're describing, you're showing there, the new technological drivers, digital tools, all of these things are improving the efficiency perhaps and helping with that pragmatic argument. How are they impacting how you and your practice start to think about what beauty is? Because beauty changes, and our definitions of what beautiful might be are perhaps informed by the other things that we're prioritizing or things that are more important to us nowadays. And do you see, or do you have a sense in your practice of, or in your group as to what kind of beauty actually is, or is that also changing?
Well, we don't have a design director. We have 120 partners, and what is beautiful is an ongoing discussion. And we talked about this a little bit, and I think that, I mean, the danger of having one design director is that that design director becomes outdated. As a large practice, we have survived for 70 years now because we are continuously growing the next generation. So my most important job as a CEO is to make sure there is a new generation ready to take over. So I think it's really important to have that discussion on what is beauty, not deciding what is beautiful, but allow the discussion to take place. And there is very much discussion within our practice, I can promise you that. And the opinions vary a lot.
And I mean, you mentioned this when we spoke before. You said something that I thought was interesting, that leadership is about making people independent. And so you're actively encouraging this kind of conversation, and there might be dissent and there might be disagreement. But how do you then manage that within an organization of the scale? I'm kind of fascinated by this because you're very clear about your values, about what's important to you as a group. And it seems to come through in the work that you produce in the buildings and the kind of the levels of what you achieve in terms of the quality of the buildings, and that they're actually kind of following through on what you say as a company you believe in. And how do you kind of support that or scaffold that? I mean, I suppose the scale of it is quite astounding to me. And again, we've discussed this, but seems to be less to you, but to me, it's kind of unimaginable. How do you manage to sustain these core values across countries, across groups, and then, as you're describing it, across generations, so that building that legacy, constantly kind of feeding it forward? What's the magic? How do you do it?
Well, I think that most people that are employed in our practice are really intelligent people, and they come to us because of our values. So that's already a buy-in. And if you don't like our values, after a while you will quit because it's not your place to be. And also, I think it's. My role as a CEO is to help shape our common vision. And we have set out a new strategic plan this past year. And I've had 400 people involved in creating that strategy and that document. So, and then once that's in place, I mean, there are so many people that have been involved. Just the process of involving people creates the buy-in to where we're going. So I think that this early involvement with and broad involvement of people when you're actually talking about what direction is the company going to move in, it's really important to achieve that. And then once you've set the direction, people will go there if you give them the resources to do so. So I don't really manage people on a day-to-day basis. They manage themselves, I would say. Yeah.
Do you think that you require different skills than you would have imagined as an architect starting out, or thinking about studying architecture, in order to do that? I mean, you're talking about setting strategy and then allowing hundreds of people to follow that strategy through. Are there core skills that you've brought through from your education, from your early practice, from the way you've kind of moved through the company that you're with now and now leading? Or are there other skills that you've acquired that you think, yeah, these are now critical for an architect to succeed in this kind of way?
This is not the kind of, repeat that again, Lala.
So I suppose I'm interested in and I'm thinking from my perspective, so I'm thinking maybe educating future architects. And the things that you've just described in terms of being able to achieve what you want to achieve, and make sure that those kind of your approach, that your values, the way that kind of results in the type of architecture that you think is important and necessary. Are there different skills nowadays required in order to do that?
Yeah, well, I think that nowadays even more. I mean, that's always been important, but now when things are changing so quickly, you have to continuously learn new things. And that's even more important now because things move so quickly now with technology, with sustainability, with the world changing. There's so many things. So you just have to be interested in learning new things. And I think that's really important to me as well. For example, during the pandemic, when I didn't have to travel so much, I enrolled to MIT to learn more about AI because that's not part of my education, but I just thought that would be a good thing to study. You know, you have to add new things constantly, and it's becoming more and more important to do that. Yeah.
Well, maybe following on from that a little bit, because I'm really interested in your form of practice. I suppose it's a large practice, but maybe it's slightly different to a kind of more standard large practice format, which tends to have a head office and then maybe some satellite offices. But it feels like that your practice is much more of a collective, that it's maybe a bunch of smaller offices that act and work together and share knowledge. And then the role, and you've talked about learning and how constant reacting to change and being able to react to change, and the role of research and development within that, and maybe that idea that the way that a collective of practices is somehow how they connect is through that kind of research, shared research and development.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think about how that works. I mean, I think I can imagine how shared, the more kind of formal, centralized research and development, where there's specific research initiatives, how that feeds back into the practices.
Yeah.
But I was sort of wondering how the opposite happens, how the more maybe individual or project-based practical knowledge, what is that feedback into the research and development
From the
initiative?
projects?
Yes, back.
Well,
Is
most of our research happen in our ongoing projects, and we also have a fund. Anyone can go to this fund. It's like open money, like it's there, and you can suggest, well, I have this ongoing project, and I want to research something really specific. I need 2 weeks time, or I need 3 weeks time to do that, and then you can get that money from that. So most of our projects are actually happening close connections to ongoing projects. And also I think that it's a great way for the young architects in the practice, because normally the more senior members of staff, they would have a lot of access to people. They would meet people on the market, they would be teaching at universities, they would be moving around a lot more. But having that money for younger people to apply, I want to research this, really makes a great difference. And then they meet someone else in the practice that would like to do the same thing, and it sort of strengthens the network within the company. That and then some of these projects are really great, and then we throw more money at them, and then it becomes something good, like the remake data projects. So
I mean, I'm wondering, when you say that they, like, it's a very pragmatic question, is like that they apply to the fund for funding for the research. Are they somehow buying their time out of the kind of more, you know, I need 2 weeks to do this, but, you know, is so that research fund pays for those 2 weeks? Like,
yes.
Is it,
Yes.
you know, pays the practice? Or
the practice pays for it. So we have money set aside for unknown research projects every year. And we also have a research fund that we set aside more money to, where also other architect practices can apply for money.
Okay.
I mean, I know your research unit, is it material matters, or has it got a particular name, or you've got a focus on wood and digital, and there's kind of specific things that seem to be priorities when you're evaluating? This sounds wonderful, by the way, the idea that a practice would kind of support, you know, ideas for research. How do you evaluate that? Do you have strategic priorities, or do you allow for the kind of the fresh idea or the looseness or something that might be unexpected? You know, is there, how does the practice approach making those types of decisions?
Well, the areas that we focus on now, it's circularity and it's health and well-being. So those two are our main focuses, but those areas are quite broad. Yeah. So normally if something is really interesting, it will get funded. But the important thing is that all of our research projects need to contribute to our vision. If not, they're not going to get funding.
And I was wondering in that, I mean, you're always kind of trying to apply things back to yourself, which is what we do, I suppose. But that idea of kind of shared practice-based research, you obviously have quite a formal and structured approach to that. And I'm wondering, do you think that structured approach is essential to it, or could it, could a less closely affiliated collective of practices benefit from a similar but maybe less structured approach? That it's not a kind of centralized thing, that there is practice-based research and it's shared practice-based research, but maybe because practices aren't as closely knit as yours are, you wouldn't really have that kind of structure that you have as in...
Well, we actually initiate quite a lot of initiatives for sharing knowledge that also involve other practices. For example, within wood, where we have a lot of experience in building in wood. And so we have started a network in Stockholm where we're sharing with a lot of other architect practices, and then we learn from each other, and it's open to anyone to contribute. And it's like an open source where we share between practices. So we are also involved in those kinds of structures. And because we are a large practice, it's easier for us to support that. If you're a really small practice, perhaps you can support one initiative or two initiatives a year, because it takes quite a lot of energy to do that. But because we are a large practice, we're able to support a lot more. That also benefit the business as other practices.
And I'm interested in that idea of the large practice because you talked about it before, as you sort of can maybe balance out the commercialism of other forces in the building industry and the construction, that you can stand on equal footing with real estate companies and, larger companies that somehow a smaller practice feels overwhelmed by in terms of their knowledge or their own research and things like that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and especially you mentioned some of your ethics, I suppose, in terms of that commerciality and the idea of, considering projects in China and Russia and then deciding not to do them. No. And maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, as a large practice, we can also invest money in educating public. For example, our sustainability director is actually an advisor to the Swedish government. And we have a lot of professors on staff, and we put quite a lot of time into trying to influence politics on how they write the legislation that limit us as architects. But we have the muscles to do that. I think that's really important. What else? I was something else I was going to say, but I lost it now. Yeah, but it will return to me perhaps. I don't know.
We might open it up to the floor, but I actually had a question. I kind of put it to you earlier informally, because it's the same question about. I thought your practice code of conduct was really interesting. I mean, this idea that you're trying to follow through in terms of the way that you expect your projects to be delivered, also setting a kind of a standard for how people behave and operate and manage, and kind of within the culture of the practice as well. And there's kind of an expectation, and then there's this is how we will do it. And I had asked how you ensure, or how you make sure that's happening. Not so much in terms of measures or metrics, because we've talked about those in the projects, but making sure the culture is still holding through on the kind of the ethical vision that that you as a collective have put to yourselves. Is that just something that happens because you're keeping kind of tabs on it, or is there a structured approach to that?
To measuring?
Seeing, are people actually following through? Because in the way that you described, this is how, this is what we will do, this is what we believe is right. How do you keep that cultural kind of position?
Firstly, I think it's really important not to be paralyzed by perfection. Because if you're always going to achieve perfection, you're going to be at a standstill. Because perfection is achieved by iterating through many projects, you get there. So we're talking in the aspect of refining the core. Every project need to have some part that is putting us closer to our vision. And we continuously talk about that in the offices. And also we measure every year all of our projects. What are the ambitions for carbon neutrality, for example? How do they rank? How are they certified? And so on. So we measure quite a lot. We do. And then, of course, the people who are really good at moving us towards our vision, they get more money for competitions, and rather than the people that don't. So if you're performing well and in line with where we want to go, it's going to be more fun.
The rewards.
Yeah.
Should we open it up to the floor? Does anybody have a question for Alexandra? You can see.
Thanks very much. And I am very conscious that the discussion up to this point has kind of focused on big issues around culture and strategy and data and analytics and technical performance. But I do have one add-on to it. You mentioned during the pandemic that you reflected on the potential impacts of AI, and I wondered what has come from that reflection.
From the pandemic, or?
No, from your own study of, you mentioned you studied in MIT on in and around the space of artificial intelligence.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear what you're saying.
You mentioned during the pandemic that you were studying in MIT.
Yeah. Oh, I studied at MIT, yes. So, yeah, absolutely. But there are a lot of us who are studying the AI subject, and we are working a lot with that at the moment on different levels. And again, it's the pragmatic approach. How do we use the tools that are already here to our benefit? And then we are also in next level looking at tools, working with companies that are actually developing AI tools within architecture. How can we be part of that and make it work better for us? And then in long term, looking at AI, during our 70 years, we have designed quite a few buildings, and that mass of data, the last step is like, how do we use that data to inform our projects to be better using AI? But that still seems, that's a little bit further away, at least for us. I know there are other practices that are further along with that.
And what do you think it means for the practice of architecture, in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. But things are going to change. But it's really hard to say how, I think. Yeah. But we're looking at AI as a tool that will support us. And I think that's the only approach that we could adopt. Yeah.
I suppose I just wanted to inquire about something you mentioned about your firm, the kind of worker-owned aspect, like the collective say in how the company operates. It seems quite foreign to anything we have here. And the kind of description that sounded a bit like a co-op. I just wanted to get your insight on how your kind of version of this operates as opposed to like a traditional co-op where they're providing like a product and it's quite straightforward, but then how does your approach change when you're tackling something as subjective and kind of nuances architectural design, where it's not like as straightforward as a traditional product that a collectively owned, a worker-owned company would provide?
But I think, I mean, the artistic part of architecture, we cannot make efficient. It has to be the process that it is. But then once that we know, when we know what we want to achieve, when we want to build things, then we can make things, then that's where the focus goes into making things efficient, because making things efficient will help us to sort of to persuade our clients. We have this artistic idea, and many times you can see that the artistic idea is lost because you're unable to explain to the client how are you going to make this happen in reality and in line with the funding that is available. So the artistic approach, I don't really see how that should be more efficient. It's only just how do you realize the project in an efficient way so you actually make it happen. So it's steps off the paper and into reality. Then you need to be efficient. Yeah.
There's one over here.
Thank you for your lecture, Alexandra. You're doing great work in Sweden, and I particularly admire the way that you spend money on research, and you obviously have achieved a position of power, really, when you're also advising the government. I want to steer in the question into a more technical, pragmatic, tactical area, because we had a very interesting discussion here around the general and the management and all that, and it's about wood and CLT, and do you see? So it's a kind of twofold question. Do you see any problems with CLT and wood in architecture at large-scale projects? That's one. Considering how the wood is resourced, particularly in Sweden, our common native country. That's the first question. And kind of following on to that, I was wondering, have your research steered into a more critical research into wood and into alternative ways of sourcing wood? I mean, there are problems, aren't there?
I think it's a big problem with wood, that wood is to solve a lot of things. I mean, the textile industry is also moving into wood as a resource for and car manufacturers. We have a research project together with the Scania, which is a big lorry, they build lorries, and the Chalmers University, and in 3D printing, you know, the remains from when you wood that you use it for printing things, and that's good for the lorries and good for us. And but when we look at sourcing the wood, most of the forests in Sweden are actually planted forests. And this is the great challenge all over the world, that we are planting monocultures. 2 decades ago, there was a big storm in the southern part of Sweden, and a lot of the forest just fell because it was all the same kind of tree with very shallow root system, so it was very sensitive to the wind. Had it been more biodiverse, the forest had not been ruined in that way. So actually, the construction industry is a real threat to biodiversity. And that's why we need to reuse what we already have. Sometimes in the office, I say that as architects, we have to work to not build.
I totally agree, and I'm so glad for that answer, because the forestry industry in Sweden, which should not be imported to Ireland, by the way, is totally devastating as it is run right now. And a lot of architects actually buy into seeing wood and CLT as the answer to climate change and to how to design sustainably. So I'm very, very happy to hear that. I think it would be amazing if White Architects would engage in research on this theme. I'd see that as something hugely important, actually. Thank you.
You talked about, it's too close. You talked about different projects you had all over the world, and I was just wondering if, in regards to things like climate and how that varies, if you think timber is a viable option globally, or if you think there's more innovation required around adapting that, depending on where the project is located.
It's really a good question, and I think that this aspect of sustainability will bring us back to having the architecture be more local. I mean, for several decades now, we have seen all these glass towers. They are very similar to each other, and they just pop up all over the world looking almost the same. You'd have glass towers in Dubai. That's just insane. I mean, with all of the heat there, or where it's really cold. I think that wood is not a solution everywhere, but the aspect of sustainability will bring us back to local building methods, locally sourced materials, and that will also make the world more diverse design-wise again, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I don't necessarily think that wood is the solution everywhere. For example, when you have really hot countries where you have a lot of insects that will ruin the wood, it's not a good idea to build things in wood. We also have a little bit of problems with our wood houses in wood buildings in Stockholm. We have woodpeckers now, and so the city has actually started a hunt for woodpeckers, because it's really hard when you have like a 4-month-old baby and you move into this wood building and you have a woodpecker going at it all night. It's not so nice. So new problems are emerging as we use new technology. Huh?
Yes, I have a question about the actual, or let's see how I can put this. So you described that there's a lot of energy, money and resources going into research about the materials that is sort of the construction materials, basically. And if some of the examples that you've shown, for example, the one in Uppsala, tend to look a bit like the architecture is quite conventional. Whereas the construction methods and the material, that's where the research has been going in. So it looks kind of like a classical modernist building, but it's made out of wood. How would you describe the relationship in between sort of the material aspects and the architectural aspects? Where do you put your energy, so to speak?
I think both. I mean, it's impossible to work with architecture if you don't work with materials. They are closely intertwined, but then so I don't really see how you could choose either or.
I think we have some questions over the right-hand side of the room. The hands up there.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little about your personal experience or your journey as an architect from sort of school or gymnasiet to a CEO.
Okay. I thought you were almost ready for beer, but I could, I actually wanted to start my own architect practice. I did my thesis at the university, and because I was a lazy student, I thought I had to create a momentum of stress. So I thought for my thesis I have to find a real client, and I did. This project was actually built, and then I won a competition also before I started working, and had that competition built. And once I had done those two projects, I figured out that there are a lot of things that I need to learn in order to do projects on a larger scale. And I thought, I'm going to work for a large practice for 1 year, and then I'm going to start my own practice. So I called my godmother and asked her where, because she's also an architect, and I said, so where should I apply for work? Well, you should work at White Arkitekter, and then you can call me in 4 years. So why should I do that? No, I don't have time to explain. You just apply there and you call me in 4 years. And so I did, and I was offered a job, and that's also the benefit of a very large practice, that you can change your position without changing employer. So I've been doing a lot of different kinds of projects and trying a lot of different positions within the practice, and I don't know how I ended up in management, but quite early on, I was offered the position as international director, because we were supposed to start up an international competition team. So I was to be head of that, and then moving into expanding that into actually opening offices in new countries. And I will never forget that, because I had a newly born son, and he was 7 weeks old, and I was called in front of the board, and I was standing there, and he would just scream the whole time. And I was standing there at the board meeting with my screaming son, and the CEO at that time, who's still a very good friend of mine, no longer working in the practice, but a good friend, he stood next to me when I was standing there with my screaming child, telling the board why this is the only person that could start up a new international division. And that also says something about the kind of practice that we are, that you are more than just a professional, that you're a human being, and that's one of the reasons that I stayed for so long. That it's also possible to be a mother and a CEO, and to try new things, work with difficult projects. So I don't know if I'm going to walk you through all of the projects that I've been doing during the past 20 years, but I just had a really good time. So
You've also answered one of kind of questions I had about the practice, which was 55% of the practice are women, which is an unusual statistic.
Yeah.
And I think that answer is probably part of the reason, the culture that you described there. We did have another couple of...
See how we're doing on time. I feel like Emmett is...
ready to jump. Okay. But there was someone who had their hand up there for a while. If we might take that question last. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Hi. It'll be a quick question. It's just about the research and practice again. And I guess my question is, when you do that, that research obviously gives you a commercial edge. So, there's a tendency maybe to keep that in-house and not put it out in the world. However, if you don't put it out in the world, nothing will ever move on or change. So what's your attitude to that? How much do you make public, and how much do you kind of keep for commercial reasons, I suppose? And how do you make those decisions?
I think we make most of it public, because knowledge travels very fast anyways. And if we are going to move the needle on sustainability, it's not only us who have to change, but an entire industry. So if we develop something together with one construction company, it's really great. If another construction company learns how to do it the same way, or another architect practice, and so I think that we are quite generous in sharing knowledge and how we do things. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll kind of finish up there, and we can all get to the bar for a beer, because I know we'd all probably like one. So really, to sum up, I mean, what struck me talking to Alexandra and hearing about White Arkitekts is how it appears, even on such a large organization, to be based on the kind of personal, at that human level. And that's the nature of our profession. You know, we're based in the personal, no matter what scale we're working at. And that we're trained, you know, from the very start to understand and predict human behavior somehow, or how people act in buildings. And that somehow, through doing what we do, we try to improve that kind of the nature of that daily existence. And that's an amazing thing. But then when we've been talking a lot about modern modes of practice and modern construction and the building industry, and there can be a tendency for all of those things to maybe dehumanize both the process and the end product. And it's usually in the name of things like speed, efficiency, and profit, which of themselves aren't, you know, they're necessary things. They're how and why we can make buildings and kind of exist in the world. But I think it's really refreshing to have kind of learned about and talked about a practice that operates in that modern construction industry, but retains the humanistic values at the core of the architect's profession. And I think White's success is largely due to an unchanging belief in the value of humanity, but coupled with, and you've talked about it a lot, coupled with that kind of incredible openness to change and that generosity of, putting it back out in the world for us all, that change is good and we all benefit from change. So that's really my summation, I suppose, that the only constant is change, and that to be open to that is an incredible thing, and it's proven incredibly useful for you as a practice. And I'd like to thank you for bringing that openness to Dublin and inspiring us to hopefully be as open and as generous. And I hope that you'll all join me in showing your appreciation for Alexandra.
Thank you for your patience. Now I hope you will all have a beer then. Yeah. Thank you.